Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Look, when an emergency strikes, panic is literally your worst enemy, right? What you need is a structured protocol. So today, we're taking professional medical training and turning it into a clear, chronological checklist to empower you to actually save a life. By the time we wrap up here, you're going to have a step-by-step clinical framework for exactly how to respond to an unresponsive person. We're breaking down precisely what healthcare workers do, from the absolute split second an emergency is discovered, all the way to the moment advanced medical help arrives. Let's dive in.
Okay, so here's the 6-step sequential clinical protocol we're going to follow. 1. Scene safety and responsiveness. 2. Checking vitals and calling 911. 3. High-quality chest compressions. 4. Airway and rescue breathing. 5. Deploying the AED defibrillator. And finally, 6. Stopping and recovery.
Starting off with step 1, scene safety and responsiveness. Before you even think about touching a patient, you absolutely have to survey the scene. We're looking for active threats here, like oncoming traffic or even an active shooter. If the scene is unsafe, do not approach. Just call 911 from a safe distance because, well, you can't help anyone if you become a victim yourself. All right, so once you know the scene is safe, we use an if-then protocol to check for responsiveness. Basically, we want to physically stimulate the patient. We definitely want to avoid doing unnecessary chest compressions on someone who, might just be taking a nap. For an adult, you're going to go right to the shoulder, tap firmly, and shout super loudly, "Hey, are you okay?" You shout just in case they're deaf, and you tap to provide that physical stimulation. But check out the difference for an infant. For a baby, you actually tap the bottom of their foot. It's a highly sensitive area for them, so it's absolutely the most effective way to check for a baseline response. Moving on to step 2, checking vitals and calling 911. If you aren't getting any response, hit the code button if you're in a hospital, or just dial 911 and put it on speakerphone right away. Keep in mind, non-responsive doesn't automatically mean cardiac arrest. It could be low blood sugar or an overdose. So assessing vital signs is our immediate next step. Now, while you're assessing their breathing, there's a critical clinical presentation you really need to be aware of. It's called an agonal breath. It looks and sounds like this sudden, heavy gasp for air. Please do not let this fool you into thinking the patient is breathing normally. It actually turns out that an agonal breath is a physiologic precursor to cardiac arrest. If you see this gasping, you have to treat it as having absolutely no signs of life, and just assume the patient is in full cardiac arrest. Along with looking for the chest to rise and fall, you need to feel for a pulse. Just use your index and middle fingers. So, for an adult, you'll check the carotid artery, right on the side of the neck closest to you. But for an infant, the anatomy is totally different. Infants have these relatively large heads and very small, chubby necks, which makes that carotid pulse incredibly difficult to find. So instead, you're going to check the brachial pulse, which you'll find on the inner aspect of the baby's upper arm. And that brings us to a massively critical parameter on our checklist, 10. You have a maximum of 10 seconds to look for that chest rise and fall and feel for a pulse. Literally just 10 seconds. You cannot spend a minute messing around trying to find the perfect pulse point. If 10 seconds go by and you do not definitively feel a pulse or see normal breathing, boom, you must make the immediate clinical decision to render aid. There's actually been this really fascinating historical shift in clinical priorities here. You might remember the old standard, ABC, meaning airway, breathing, circulation. But nowadays, once a victim is pulseless, the new priority is CAB, circulation, airway, breathing. Why the swap? Well, because when a heart stops, the oxygen doesn't just magically vanish from the body. It's still in the blood. It's just, not moving anywhere. So your absolute immediate goal is to circulate that residual oxygenated blood straight up to the brain to prevent permanent damage. Which leads us perfectly into step 3, high-quality chest compressions. This is the absolute core life-saving action. This is where you literally step in to act as the patient's heart. To do this effectively, we really need to understand a bit of clinical anatomy. You got to place the heel of your hand in the exact center of the chest, right on the sternum, directly between the nipple line. And you have to be super careful to avoid the xiphoid process. That's the very tip at the bottom of the breastbone. Oh, and obviously, avoid the throat too. Getting your hand placement exactly right ensures you're compressing the heart efficiently without causing, unnecessary internal damage. Now, I want to address a super common hesitation head-on here. A lot of people freeze up because they're terrified of hurting the victim, or maybe they're worried about legal repercussions. First off, if you are rendering aid, Good Samaritan laws generally protect you. Also, do not fear exposing a woman's chest. You literally have to do this in preparation for the AED to save her life.
And second, when you're compressing deeply enough, there's a good chance you might feel the resistance or even hear the sound of a breaking rib. As medical professionals are taught, we may have to sacrifice this breastbone right now in order to get to the heart. Think about it. A broken rib can heal. Cardiac arrest is fatal.
Let's look at exactly how to execute these compressions. For an adult or a child, you'll use 2 hands, lock your elbows out straight, align your shoulders directly over your hands, and press straight down. You're aiming for a depth of 2 inches. Now, for an infant, the technique changes up to protect their tiny bodies. You'll use either 2 fingers right in the center of the chest or a 2-thumb encircling technique, and you're only going to a depth of about 1.5 inches, which is basically 1/3 the depth of their chest.
Okay, this next concept is incredibly important. You must allow for full chest recoil. What does that mean? Chest recoil is just allowing the chest to rise all the way back to its normal position after every single push. See, when you push down, you're forcing blood out of the heart. But when you let up, you're allowing those heart chambers to actually refill with blood. If you get adrenaline pumping and press too fast without letting the chest expand, you're basically just pumping an empty heart, and that does the brain absolutely no good.
So the magic number to remember here is 30. You have to perform 30 high-quality compressions in a single uninterrupted cycle. Fun fact for you, doing these compressions to the beat of the Bee Gees' Stayin' Alive, or honestly, even Baby Shark, keeps you perfectly at the clinically recommended pace. Definitely count out loud. It helps keep your rhythm steady and ensures you hit exactly 30 before you move on to the next step. All right, step 4, airway and rescue breathing. Immediately after you finish those 30 compressions, we need to top up the oxygen levels in the patient's blood. Here's the micro routine for rescue breaths. First, apply a pocket mask, preferably one with a one-way valve, over the bridge of the nose and the mouth. Second, open up the airway using the head tilt chin lift technique. And third, deliver 2 separate breaths, each lasting about 1 second. Now, huge clinical warning here, do not overdo it. Don't hyperinflate the lungs with giant, massive breaths. Giving too much air can force that extra air right into the stomach, which will cause the patient to vomit, and that immediately complicates their airway.
And there's a really vital pediatric difference you've got to note on your mental checklist here. While adults typically go into cardiac arrest because of some heart rhythm anomaly, children and infants often arrest because of an airway obstruction, like drowning or choking on a toy or food. Because of that, before you give rescue breaths to a child, always look in the mouth first. If you spot an object, do a quick finger sweep to get it out of there.
Moving to step 5, deploying the AED defibrillator. Now, the external part of that name is key. You've got to make absolutely sure you never place the AED pads directly over an internal, implanted pacemaker. You can usually spot those pretty easily as a small, elevated bump right under the skin. The exact second that AED arrives on the scene, you initiate this sequence. Step 1, power it on immediately. Seriously, just turn it on, and the voice prompts will literally guide you through the rest of the whole shebang. Step 2, apply the pads to a bare, exposed chest. Step 3, plug in the connector if it's not already attached. Step 4, when the machine starts analyzing the heart rhythm, make sure everyone stands completely clear of the patient. If a shock is advised, double-check that absolutely no one is touching the victim and hit that flashing shock button.
When it comes to actually placing those pads, for an adult, one pad goes high on the right side of the chest and the other goes low on the left side, kind of right under the breast crease, which happens to be the strongest part of the heart. But here's the rule. AED pads can never ever touch each other. So for a small child or an infant where chest space is super limited, you're going to place one pad directly in the center front of their chest and the other pad perfectly aligned on the center of their back.
Once you press that shock button, there's no residual electrical energy left on the patient, so you go instantly back into chest compressions. You're probably going to hear a beeping metronome coming from the AED at this point. That beep is pacing you to a target rate of 100 to 120 compressions per minute. Follow that rhythm for sure. It keeps you from going way too fast and ensures you allow for that vital chest recoil we talked about earlier.
Finally, step 6, stopping and recovery. Look, performing CPR is incredibly physically demanding, so we need to know the exact clinical criteria for when you can safely stop. You only stop CPR under a very strict checklist of conditions. You stop if the scene suddenly becomes unsafe. You stop if you are literally completely physically exhausted and simply cannot push anymore. You stop when paramedics or a rapid response team arrive and physically take over for you. Or, of course, you stop if signs of life return, like if the patient achieves a pulse and starts breathing on their own. Now, if they do wake up, roll them onto their side into the recovery position so they don't choke if they happen to vomit. But listen closely to this. Keep the AED powered on and keep those pads attached. It's going to continue monitoring their heart every 2 minutes just in case they arrest again.
We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today, but I want to leave you with this final kind of provocative thought. A lot of people assume they don't need to memorize this checklist because their office has a designated health and safety officer, or maybe a workplace nurse. But what if it's your workplace nurse who goes into cardiac arrest? Who operates the AED then? Don't wait for an emergency to figure this stuff out. Find out exactly what model of AED is in your building today, look it up, and empower yourself to be the clinical difference between life and death. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Stay safe out there.